All right. So, hi everyone. I hope everyone is enjoying all of the wonderful programming that we've had for at least this morning. So, as we head into the afternoon, I know that this is another critical conversation. So, again, thanks for taking the time outside of your hacking to just join us to listen in. So, this conversation in this panel is really going to be looking at global sustainability. So, what will sustainability look like in 2050? And I know we only have 30 minutes, so I'm going to do a quick intro to our speakers who are here today, and then we'll jump right into panel questions. Quick housekeeping, there is no live Q&A for this panel session. So if you do have questions for any of our speakers at any time, then you can head over to the Slack channel and go to Ask Speaker Questions and type your question there. What we'll do is we'll ask our speakers if they have any time after their session to float around in Slack and answer those questions for you. So who we have today, really exciting. I've got Abigail, who is the US Sustainability Manager from H&M. She waves. We have Hannah Davis from Techstars Sustainability. We have Nisha from World Resources Institute, and I know she's a great brain on climate finance. And we have Neil from Climate Kick. And so I know we'll talk a lot of things about what they're doing actually in Europe with the EU as well. So to go ahead and open the panel, the question I have for all of our panelists is, how have you and your organization acted to combine the interests of planet, people, and profitable business? And Hannah, let's go ahead and start with you.
Sure. So I have a bit of a unique situation in which I work for a company called Techstars, which works to support entrepreneurs from idea to IPO. But my particular program is partnering with the Nature Conservancy, which is the world's largest environmental nonprofit. And so combined with this entrepreneurship, plus all the amazing resources of TNC, which has over 400 of the leading scientists in climate on their staff, we really work on three main priorities. And the biggest and most obvious one is accelerating companies working at the intersection of technology and conservation. The second is to bring more innovation into the Nature Conservancy to help them work more efficiently and effectively. And the third is just to broaden the entire ecosystem of conservation technology. So that's not just kind of, as people imagine conservation, just maintaining land as it is, but really around carbon removal, better agriculture practices, water resources, anything. If you think of natural resources, we're kind of touching technologies that are helping natural resources be maintained. And in the case of things like reforestation and combined. So we're also putting capital dollars towards these startups and towards the ecosystem and attempting to bring in more dollars to the space. And so we'll work with a variety of companies, a variety of stakeholders and partners, all in the name of being more effective through technology in the conservation space.
I love that. Nisha, would you like to go next?
Sure, thanks, Sarah. I'm very delighted to be here. I mean, I think one of the things that WRI does, so World Resources Institute, we're a global think tank sort of based out of DC and have sort of sister offices about 11 countries around the world. But really what we're focused on is advancing sort of the intersection of environment and development, right? So all of the challenges that we're really facing right now, and that's bringing the data and the analytics behind it to effect sort of policy solutions. That's everything from looking at water scarcity and what it looks like in 2030 and 2050 to look at what we have to do now to go into better water practices, into changing how we actually design infrastructure systems, to looking at things like carbon capture and technology and what's most effective. We're much more on the analytical and the policy side. I think Hannah is probably much more on the solutions and investing side, but really it is really bringing together and understanding what people need and what we would need in the future. One of the things that we really prize is the sort of the voice of communities as well as governments in this. And so a lot of the work that we do is the facilitation of conversations as well, looking at these issues and coming up with things that are actually practical as well as implementable. So I'll stop there. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, of course. Neil.
Hi. So yes, thank you for having me. So I'm Neil Walmsley. I'm with Climate Kick, which is Europe's premier innovation agency for climate change. We were essentially established around about a decade ago to help build Europe's green economy and accelerate the rate of decarbonisation and resilience building across Europe through innovation. The challenge that Europe was facing at the time, and still is that despite very ambitious targets being set across all the different states at different levels to tackle climate change, the gap between what needs to be done and what's actually being achieved just seems to keep on growing. And so we were set up to help drive innovation as being one of the major levers of change for achieving that. And we have been working with a community of large companies, universities, national governments, cities, many other organizations over the last decade to drive funding and investment into innovations that range from new technologies and startups, focusing on everything from electric jets like the Lilium electric jet to alternative proteins and satellite data for climate risk planning, through to much larger systems level programs that aim to help cities decarbonize by 2030, that aim to help entire regions of Europe massively increase their resilience to severe climate impacts, and many other things on top of that. And the key thing about the work we do is it very much focuses on being a public-private collaboration. That it's intended to really drive innovation and climate change, but in a way in which is economically self-sustaining, that really helps develop new businesses, new solutions, helps them grow, and then connects them up with strategic challenges. The strategic challenges that we need to address to tackle climate change. So it isn't just focusing on building up the supply; it's actually connecting it to the demand as well.
Yeah, I hear you on that one. Abigail, do you want to chime in?
Yes. So I'm hopeful that most of you are familiar with H&M. And at H&M, our business idea is actually fashion and quality at the best price in a sustainable way. So I'm kind of coming at this from a little bit of a different point of view than the other panelists. But really, in our business idea, with it being in this sustainable way, we're operating under 3 pillars. That's leading the change to a sustainable fashion industry, becoming fully circular and climate positive, while being a fair and equal company. So built into our business idea, we're trying to combine people, planet, and still being a business. And we actually believe that the only way to continue to be a profitable business is to innovate to be fully sustainable and change how the fashion industry operates. We have an obligation to the 1.7 million people in our value chain, many of them working in the areas most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. But we also have a duty to the planet to operate within its boundaries that we know exist and to drive the change within the entire fashion industry. So this involves a lot of partnership with different industry groups, suppliers, governments, and really working outside of ourselves as a siloed business, but really looking at how are we changing the entire industry through investments in innovation. We always say there's no competition in sustainability, and we've actually opened up like our supply chain and resources to other people in the industry so they can take the advantage that we have in our sustainable supply chain. But not only is sustainability a competitive advantage now, but we believe that it is the only way that we can run our business with the long-term best interests of people and planet, and the only way that we as a business can survive.
Yeah, so a follow-up question actually for you with H&M. So with the long supply chains, the energy-intensive production, the fashion industry is responsible for about 10% of greenhouse emissions. So how is H&M really planning to tackle sustainability with that? That's a huge undertaking.
It's a big one. But so we know that the climate crisis poses challenge to all industries, including fashion. Exactly like you said, if the fashion industry is responsible for a 10%, that's a huge percent for one industry. And we take our responsibility to stay within the planetary boundaries very seriously. So I mentioned we have the goal of becoming climate positive. So this is actually becoming climate positive throughout our entire value chain by 2040. So we will be climate neutral by 2030 and then climate positive by 2040. And this is our guiding light to tackling sustainability. We have this long-term vision that we work with in all parts of our business. And so that starts really at the design phase. Sort of when we're thinking up what our product is and what our business is, we keep that in mind. And we're shifting our business to be fully circular, and that means a lot of investment. So heavily investing in ways to make our industry more sustainable. We have the H&M Lab, which is just all about how can we do things differently? How can we become fully circular? We also have a partnership with the Hong Kong Research Institute of Textiles and Apparel, where our work with them, we discovered a scalable way to separate and recycle blended materials. We also have the Global Change Awards, which is an early stage innovation accelerator program. So we know that the fashion industry, given how it operates today, will not survive. You just cannot have the industry as it is and say, looking forward to 2040, 2050, this is how it's going to be. So we know that not only do we have to invest in new materials, new fabrics, new ways of recycling, but also just completely different ways that we get our clothes and that we work with different objects. So we know that it isn't just one business that needs to change. We know it's not just H&M can be fully circular and fully sustainable. We know that it needs to be an industry-wide shift. So we actually are using our influence and our size and our scale to support positive transformation in the fashion industry. And that is about driving innovation, collaborating with others, pushing for greater transparency. That's a huge one, is where are your clothes coming from? Who's making your clothes? And also rewarding sustainable actions, both within our own industry, but also with our customers.
Yeah, that's a great answer, and you're exactly right that it's not on one person's shoulders or one organization's shoulders. And I love what you shared about climate positivity. But I hear you. We need to ideate. We need to find those ideas. So actually, my next question will be for Hannah. With running the Techstars Accelerator program with the Nature Conservancy, what are the hottest trends that you're currently seeing in the startup world around sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, I think to start, that sustainability itself is becoming a trend. I mean, seeing companies doing what H&M is doing gives me so much hope in the world where there's not always a lot of hope. And so if you think about every industry is starting to move to that place where H&M is, fashion is a big one, but we're seeing obviously the big players, Amazon, Microsoft, all to kind of smaller consumer products. And so Techstars runs 50 accelerators around the world. And I'm starting to notice, though mine's the only sustainability one, more sustainability companies are coming through all of our programs. Which to me is a really good sign. So I would say if you're here looking to start a company, like just doing the work is important no matter what kind of sector you're in. Like it's a huge gazillion piece puzzle that we're working on. And so whatever you're working on is important if it's touching sustainability. That being said, obviously there are, quite a few different trends. One, I think ag tech, I think Neil mentioned they're looking at some plant-based foods. That's a big area. Regenerative agriculture, which touches both big corporates. Cargill, I know, is investing a lot in regenerative agriculture, as well as kind of on the conservation side of things. And then supply chain management, which you'll see in kind of any industry. Energy obviously is huge, electrification, renewables, grid and battery management. And then we're seeing a lot around both carbon offsets and carbon removal. So if you think about all these big commitments these companies are making, we have to back up into how are people actually going to get there? What exists today? What needs to exist tomorrow? And so right now it's exciting. People are doing a lot of kind of more natural climate solutions, ways to get to carbon removal. They're going to have to start doing direct air capture. The technology doesn't exist in the way that we need it to yet, but while that technology is in development, so reforestation, wetlands, regenerative agriculture, as I mentioned, all ways of doing carbon removal and carbon offsets. We're seeing a lot in the personal offset tracking. I don't think that's the maybe highest leverage point there. And then, of course, circular economy is a huge one. I could go on, but I'll leave it there.
Yeah, no, that's a powerful answer. And I think this also leads into that theme of investment. So I know both Hannah and Abigail, you've mentioned that. So actually I'm going to turn and ask Nisha a question about, given your unique perspective from a global level at the World Resources Institute, what are the trends that we're seeing with climate finance and sustainability? Because of course, we need the resources in order to make this change. So I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. And I think one of the things that I would say that's just right off the bat is that it's no longer just about reducing emissions, right? There's a lot that we need to do in terms of actually already dealing with the impacts of climate change, as well as looking at what a more resilient future looks like. So sustainability is not just about the reducing of emissions, but it's also looking at how do we use water. So I'm sure Abby is thinking about this from the context of an H&M. So like, how are you using water? How you're recycling it? How are you using land and resources? Hannah mentioned sort of nature-based solutions. How are we actually, say, leveraging coastal mangroves, and how does that prevent sort of or reduce the impacts of hurricanes and sea level rise? And so I think that's one of the bigger trends in sustainability and looking at climate finance, that it is really a lot more about resilience as well, and looking at adapting and how you actually invest in technologies that will get us there. The second piece that I would really point out is that it's not just climate finance itself, it is finance, right? So it is your bigger banks. So like if some of you, if any of you followed the news earlier this year in Davos, BlackRock, one of the biggest pension and asset managers out there, announced that they were going to start looking at climate risks in their portfolios and how they actually invest in their clients, how those businesses will then be asked to report to, what are we doing to reduce emissions? What are the assets what are the things that we've already invested in that we no longer use, things like fossil fuels, to what are the physical climate risks, right? What is the chances of floods? What are the chances of droughts that are actually going to affect our operations? So I'd say that is a bigger piece, that it's not just about impact investing anymore. It's not just about the environmental, social governance pieces that we look at, but it is that fact that finance itself is sitting up and saying, okay, we've got to take a look at what we're investing in and what are the incentives we're giving, right, by putting money where it is. The third piece is that I would say that in general, more and more people, like on a daily basis, are taking notice of where and how and to whom money is going to, right? And if you're thinking about the vulnerable communities around the world that are sort of disincentivized or do not have access to resources to actually do more resilient work, and they do want to, right? And the solutions are out there for some of these things. So it's how do you get resources to where it needs to go? How do you actually think about, say, the stimulus funds that are going out right now? How do you make them more resilient? How do you make them more low carbon? For example, the EU as well as Canada has asked that any stimulus money that goes to businesses will have to report on how they use it and how sort of climate risk disclosure, right? So like, what are the things that we've invested in, whether that's fossil fuels or whether that's physical climate risks? Like, let's start actually reporting, in which case you have more information to innovate, to understand where money is going and how, this is going to go in the future. I'd say I'll stop there, but it's a pretty positive trend. We just have to get to the trillions in reporting rather than the millions and billions that we're in. So thanks.
Yeah, I hear you. And I remember when that news with the VP of BlackRock came out and reading that letter, and it was so inspiring just to see that change. But something that you talked about was climate resiliency. And I know that's a big piece of this conversation. So a question I have for Neil related to that topic is, so with EIT, the Climate Kick, you're a European knowledge and innovation community. You work towards supporting and building a climate resilient society founded on the zero carbon economy. But how do you actually apply that at a systems level, that approach to building communities? How do you steer them in that undertaking, especially at that scale?
Yeah, so it's a very challenging question to answer, but it really does come from many years of experience and a lot of lessons learned. I mean, Climate Kick has been operating for quite a number of years now, and the programs we've been running, we've literally poured hundreds of millions of euros into a vast number of projects, and we've had fantastic results on one level. So we've, 2,000 new businesses and startups. We've attracted several billion actually in follow-on investment for many of the programs that we've helped to fund, and many other, sort of big number achievements, thousands of people through our education programs and so on and so forth. But a few years ago, we had to actually step back and ask the question of, well, what actual difference is this making? I mean, has Europe's carbon emissions radically dropped? Has society become significantly more resilient? And we had to actually be very honest with ourselves and say, well, not really. We've heard these are fantastic projects. They're absolutely brilliant, but ultimately they're just projects, and even the biggest project itself does not have a systems level impact. The only way you can really achieve that is through a portfolio approach, where you look at the systemic challenge that you're trying to face and all the drivers of change that are underneath that, where you need to have interventions that will each subtly move the system, but will do so in an interconnected way. And what we found in discussion with many of our stakeholders, these national governments, cities, very large companies, companies like IKEA and EDF Energy and many others, was that they did see impact from these projects, but they were aware of the limitations of them. And so what we developed a few years ago was a portfolio approach, which we called Transition in Time. And that basically brings communities of key stakeholders together to look at these strategic challenges. And it's led very much by what we call a challenge owner. And that might be a national government, it might be a city, it might be a large company, or another organization, or even a cluster of organizations, but where they're responsible for a large systemic climate challenge, and where they can really drive the mandate to push things forward. We work with them to set out what that challenge is and what those drivers of change are that need to be achieved. And then Climate Kick will work with our partners, the universities, the companies, and many others, to pull together a group of solution providers who will focus on drivers of change, which could be technologies, it could be investments, it could be behavioral change, it could be regulatory innovation, many different things. And we will put together a portfolio of projects with these organizations. Now, in Europe, we have the advantage that we can actually seed fund quite a lot of that as well, and that does make things speed up very quickly when you're in a position to do that. But our partners also put in a huge amount of funds and resources as well to make this happen. And so we've launched a number of very large programs called deep demonstrations to test that approach out, that have been running for a few years now, working with ports across Europe, working with city administrations, 15 city administrations, large company supply chains, green finance, many other things like that. I won't go into the detail because it's just too much, and I'll forget to mention key facts, and I'll annoy my colleagues if they ever see the recording. But it's a really ambitious program, but it's starting to show significant impact. And where we see the next steps with this is very much working with the European Union through the EU Green Deal, through their new mission boards, which I would strongly recommend people who are not familiar with mission boards to look them up. That's going to be the Apollo space programs of the European Union on key areas, and many other things to really start to scale up the programs. And one thing I didn't say when I was doing my little introduction is that we're not just Europe focused anymore. So I'm actually the director for our US operations, which we've just started to expand. But we also have operations now in Africa, in China, India, the Middle East, and a few other locations. So we're actually moving away from a Europe focus to being an international one. And I will stop there.
I love that. Yeah, I feel like it's now time, and I love that most organizations have that 2030 deadline. So all of us collaborating, hopefully the next decade, to kind of see some change. So the closing question that I have for all of our panelists, and I know some of you have already started to allude to a bit of the answer to this, but what are the opportunities that you see when it comes to sustainability? What should it look like come 2050? Love to hear your thoughts. And we can go ahead and start with Abigail.
I mean, I think that for us, sustainability, of course, we can talk about limited using resources and designing for circularity and no sort of end of life for products. But I really think what we need and what we're seeing and even what H&M is looking towards is new business models and new ways of what does it mean to consume and be a consumer. And that's something we're really seeing and looking forward to, is just a change in what is the fashion industry, what is being sustainable when you're a consumer.
Powerful. I'm ready to change. Nisha, do you want to go next?
Sure. I think one of the things, maybe I already alluded to this, one would be that, all finance is sustainable, right? Like there is just no alternative in some ways. And I think that's actually pretty doable. You've got opportunities in every single facet of life, from clothing to infrastructure to water to, where you get your flowers from, for even, right? And there's a business opportunity in every single step of those pieces. So stop there.
Hint, hint, hackers that are watching this video. Hannah, would you like to go next?
Sure. I know we're all supposed to stay positive on these kind of things, but I do have to say, I don't think we're on track for our goals as a global planet. We have a lot of work to be done. I don't think that means we can't do it, but we need more urgency and we need more resources. Like every talented person should be working on climate, and it always shocks me when that's not the case. And also, we're already feeling the effects. I mean, it's a huge social justice issue. A lot of people and people who are already underprivileged are feeling the effects of climate change today. And so there's that kind of attending to that as well as moving forward. And also, I think, I guess where we'll be, I hope that we will have a price on carbon and a carbon tax, and we will have figured out the equation of not just offsetting, but removing our carbon. And all of the talented people in the world, like yourselves, will be working on this project and collaborating with, the amazing organizations that are on the call today. And people just like Sarah, it's so inspiring that you just were like, hey, we need more people doing this. So I'm going to run an intense hackathon on climate and get people going on it and get people exposed to it. This kind of stuff really, really matters. And so I just also thank you and thanks to the whole team and everyone that's showing up on their weekend to do this. It matters and your work is important. And I'm just so grateful and inspired to see folks like you working on it.
Thank you, Hannah. Neil, would you like to close?
Oh, well, I don't know how I can follow up on that. That was a great. Well, actually, everyone's comments were great, but that was basically a great set of comments there. So, I think from my side, I would very much reiterate what was being said. But I suppose a few additional thoughts would be: I think in the future we are going to see much greater interconnectivity amongst solutions. So at the moment, and historically, organizations have tended to work on what's within their control. They've developed their own solutions, they've tested them out, and this has been effective to some extent. But things are moving along rapidly, and the speed of development of new ideas and solutions is getting faster and faster. And what we're finding is that, and it goes back to the systems level thinking, it's no individual solution changes a system, but groups of them do. And the ability to adopt and change and adapt rapidly and integrate all these different things is really sort of starting to have an impact. And what we're seeing is lots of companies and other organizations working together in ways they wouldn't have previously to roll things out and not be too wedded to any one thing as new things come along to adopt it, but also not being proprietary about it. So just because my organization didn't develop it doesn't mean that I won't use theirs and vice versa. And okay, organizations that might traditionally be competitive with one another saying, well, look, that's we'll compete on our normal day-to-day business. But for this topic, for whether it's sustainable supply chains or it's energy provision or whatever it may be, we will work together as a collective group in our region, internationally, and we'll implement these measures. And that's how the system changes as a whole. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the future. Whether that will be enough on its own, it's too soon to say. But I think that that's going to move definitely that's going to move the needle. And like I say, there's a lot more sophisticated thinking now amongst governments, both national and subnational, on how these situations can be approached. There's a much greater ambition amongst them, and there's also more evidence now of what successes look like, how to actually try out things that would have previously been scary and that they now feel confident in doing. So I think that's I think there's a lot of optimism there ahead, a lot of challenges to overcome, but I think there's a lot of potential and lots of opportunities for everyone.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's, to what Hannah said, tremendous amount of work that needs to be done, but we can all collaborate and share knowledge and truthfully share the solutions and be able to adapt and adopt quicker to meet the goals by 2030. And so with that, you've heard from the experts. Thank you to everyone that joined us today for this panel session. If you have any questions for Neil, Nisha, Hannah, Abby, kudos, compliments, whatever it might be, go ahead to the Slack channel, ask speaker questions, and chime in there. But again, I just also want to have a very big thank you to our panelists for being here on their Saturday, sharing their expertise, sharing their stories. We're all doing tremendous work, so thank you so much for everything that you do. And thank you for being a part of Capsule Hack as well. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.